Hello, adventurers of all shapes and sizes. My name is Chance. Welcome to my guide. And today we're going to be just going through a quick introduction to Pathfinder 2e. We're not going to be covering a whole lot of mechanics, rules, or really anything of that nature in this video. In this video, we're going to be focusing primarily on outlying tabletop RPGs, outlying role-playing games in general, explaining various roles and rules of common courtesy. But before we get into all of that, I just want to quickly go over what is a role-playing game. Now, this is very much my elevator pitch. Ultimately, you may develop your own throughout time if you don't have one already. If you do have one already, however, please put it down beneath in the comment section. I'm always curious how people explain role-playing games to other people who've never played one. In terms of how I go about it, I simply just say it's very similar to a choose-your-own-adventure book, only instead of a book, it's a friend narrating a story, and instead of you playing it alone, you're playing it with a group of people, and collectively you decide on the outcome of the narrative. That's kind of my whole elevator pitch in a nutshell. Every once in a while, I'll explain that there are rules involved in that, and I may go into more detail based on who I'm talking to, but if it's a total stranger, I just compare it to a choose-your-own-adventure book. That being said, at its core, role-playing games have rules, there's a mix of strategy in there, but ultimately it is a true bonding experience to be shared with friends or people who are likely going to be friends if they're not already. Now let's get into some more technical stuff and look at the flow of the game. As I alluded to earlier, there's one person who narrates. This person is called the Game Master in most cases, or Dungeon Master, you can use either or. So the Game Master narrates by explaining a scene, describing certain events, or having dialogue with the party. And then the party in turn responds. And after that, the DM then narrates what happens as a direct response to however they decided to behave, act, or move forward. After that, the cycle very much repeats itself, virtually in perpetuity, or at least until the game is finished up. So it's this constant back and forth between the Dungeon Master creating the world and the party choosing which aspects of it to explore. At its very core, that's really all there is to it. Now let's break down the individual roles here, starting of course with the players. Odds are there's going to be more than one player, so there are a couple things to keep in mind. Firstly, have your character sheet at the ready and understand your character, not just mechanically, but do your best to understand their backstory, their past, how they behave, their mannerisms, things of that nature, things that will actually impact how they view the world. Outside of that, be prepared. As a player, usually the only two things you need are your character sheet and the dice themselves. Pathfinder 2e, much like D&D in general, use polyhedral dice, which is a set of 7 dice. You can have more or less as needed, but a set contains 7, and they range from a 20-sided dice to a 4-sided dice, indicated by D and then the sides on the dice. So a 20-sided dice is a D20. When there's multiple dice that need to be rolled, there's a number in front. So if you needed to roll 5 6-sided dice, for example, it would be 5d6, 5 indicating the number of dice that need to be rolled, and then the 6 at the end indicating the size of the dice. Now, based on your class and your abilities and your spells, you might want to have more copies of certain dice than others, but ultimately that's up to you as a player. There's nothing to stop you from just re-rolling the same dice or downloading a ton of free apps. However, on the app side, a lot of DMs typically don't like those, but ultimately, if yours is cool with it, then it's fine. And another thing I want to point out, and this relates more towards common courtesy than anything else, it's not a hard, fast rule, but when you're playing, be calm, be respectful, keep an open mind, and remember that this is a cooperative experience for better or for worse, so just enjoy the ride. And I think that's important, and I think a lot of new players and experienced players could benefit from taking that to heart. Now let's move on from the players over to the Game Master themselves. Now, the Game Master is an interesting set of circumstances in the way that they, in previous editions of the Dungeons and Dragons mythos and of Pathfinder, had a adversarial relationship with the party. And a lot of that carries through to current editions, although the game rules themselves aren't really designed to facilitate that form of interaction anymore. So the Game Master, at their core, is responsible for planning out an overall narrative, keeping track of locations and various other settings, communicating to the players everything that's going on in the world in a way that makes sense based on their current understanding of the events. And of course, the Game Master is responsible for creatures and NPCs of all forms, shapes, and sizes. So they do play a very omnipotent, godlike role in the sense that they, in one form or another, control a lot of variables that the party just simply doesn't have access to. But ultimately, they're just playing the game in a different way, and it's important to respect that. Ultimately, I think everyone should be a Game Master at least once, at least for one shot, just to get a feel for what it's like, and I think it's that kind of shared perspective that can really help progress a game forward in a friendly way. With that being said, there's an important topic worth discussing, and that is gaming is for all. That is to say that this is a game that's meant to be enjoyed by everyone at the table, players, game masters, doesn't matter. So a couple of key steps into making sure that happens. Listen. And this is not just for the players, this is for the game master as well. If your players aren't having fun, odds are you really need to change your approach as to how you're running the game, and the best way to know whether or not they're having fun is to listen to them. A good indicator is in most games where the party's having a blast, the party does around 80% of the talking, and the game master does about 20%, kind of just explaining scenarios, setups, kind of nodding or shaking his head as things play out, stuff like that. And another thing worth pointing out is it's meant to be a balanced experience. So do your best not to create a Mary Sue of a character who is the best at everything. Be sure to give everyone their chance to shine. Game masters are usually pretty good with this, but there's always going to be problem players who want to step on other people's toes to achieve monumental greatness. And sometimes that can be a good thing, but you need a really good party dynamic to make that work and to facilitate that in a way where no one gets their feelings hurt or gets upset. And with all that being said, if you haven't been able to clue in already, it's all about having fun. It's literally it. You're in a cool fantasy world where your decisions don't directly impact the real world, and you can kind of cut loose, have fun. It leads to interesting interactions, leads to a lot of laughs, leads to just great memories in general, and I think it's important to move forward with that mindset every time you start a game. Now let's take a look at the tools of play. So there are a couple different tools. Some of them you might need access to, some of them you won't. Depends on whether or not you're a game master or a player. The first is a character sheet. This is going to be primarily used by the players, although if a DM has a more sophisticated NPC, it might be worth carrying around a character sheet for them. The second thing you're going to need is an adventure module. This can be a homebrewed one you purchased online or in a store. Doesn't really matter, but some form of adventure you're going to be running. It always helps to have written material, something to refer back to. Be careful you don't make it too constricting if you do build one up from the ground. We're going to probably do videos in the future on how to write a good adventure, but just be prepared for things to go off track, because that's typically how these things go. Another thing you're going to need is dice. This is true whether or not you're a player or a game master. Doesn't matter, same set of dice. There's no proprietary dice in Pathfinder 2e, which is great, so bear that in mind. Another thing you're gonna need, and this is primarily for the game master, is a bestiary. This is a book of beasts, monsters, some NPCs as well, and you're gonna be using their stats to throw them up against the players. Now, if you have a familiar or something of that nature, it might make sense for a player to have access to a bestiary as well, but for the most part, it's just something that's meant to be used by the DM. Now, another thing you're going to need is a map or some miniatures or some way to keep track of who's where relative to whatever. You can do theater of the mind, which is without any maps or anything, just you talk through it, and that can be fun as well, but I find when you're dealing with new players, having something concrete you can look at and refer to is abundantly important. That being said, that is going to conclude this video on the what is a role-playing game part of the introduction. I hope you really enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot of use out of it. This was more aimed at new players rather than experienced ones. If you've been playing the game for a number of years, all of this might be self-evident to you, but it still helps to refer back to the basis. And since this is a new game, a lot of new people are going to be playing it, so it might help to refer them to this video just so they can kind of expect what to see when they actually play the game. That being said, hope you all have a great day, and as always, happy adventuring, everyone.